What's happening, guys? This is Mike at Mike's Little Dragon Channel, and tonight I am going to talk about one of my favorite comic books from when I was a kid. This is New Warriors. This book, well, first of all, New Warriors first appeared in a two-part Thor story. I believe it was Thor 411, 412, and they appeared and helped Thor in a fight against Juggernaut. So they are already a team when they appeared in that story. So what New Warriors issue number 1 here does is it shows how the team was formed. Now, I was a really, really big fan of this book. This book came out in 1990. I was 15 years old, something like that. And there has been 2 books in my lifetime that I was the right demographic, I was in the right target audience, whatever you want to call it. It was, the first one was Power Pack. That is when I was younger, 9, 10, 11, something like that. And this one is New Warriors. And both of those books, I was the target audience for it, and both of them hit me like a ton of bricks. This book here I had a subscription, much like Power Pack did. I had a subscription to this in the mail. I loved all the characters. I was just, head over heels for this book. It was really a book that was geared towards young people. The things that we were into, the things that were going on with us, our concerns about the environment, concerns about big business, all those Gen X, all those Gen X things that we were into, concerns about technology going out of control, hate groups, all that type of stuff, the environment, everything. And this book here touched on all of it. I will go ahead and open up and talk a little bit about the book as we go. Now, this is just an incredible opening page here. Now, the creative team on this book, Fabian Nicieza and Mark Bagley, who, as you know, is, obviously, if you read any Amazing Spider-Man in the 90s, I would probably say the mid to late 90s, that was Mark Bagley Spider-Man that you were reading. The main title, anyway. He was on this before he got on to Amazing Spider-Man. So it was, I'm not going to say this was the book that he was cutting his teeth on, but what I will say is, he was on this book before. This was right before he took his next step to Amazing Spider-Man, which would put him into a superstar type of role. Fabian Nicieza, he wrote a ton of books in the 90s. A lot of X-Force, a lot of mutant books. The Nomad book he wrote. Just a really crafty writer, incredibly talented, still working today. He was on this book, I believe, I want to say maybe the first 30 issues, and definitely the first 25. But I would put his first 25 issues on this book here. I would say that is probably some of his best work, period. And I would put it, I would compare it to, I would say that if you wanted to, how do I want to phrase this? I would put his first 25 issues of New Warriors up against any of the other work he did. That's how strong I think his work is on New Warriors. He really had a feel for these characters and the vibe that Marvel wanted to send with this book. But we open up the book here. Now, this character here, this is Night Thrasher. He was a brand new created character. He had never appeared before he showed up in New Warriors. So what we have right here, just kind of you open it up and you're just like, oh, what the hell is this? What is going on here? And what we see is he has Richard Rider, who we find out is Nova, on top of a building. He drops him off. His powers kick in, and he flies, and he's able to save himself from turning into, street pizza or whatever. Now, prior to this book, Nova had lost his powers. I don't know if he lost it in his own ongoing book, or if it was in he had some appearances in Fantastic Four after his book got canceled. But Nova was a character. He was basically a Peter Parker style character. He was a high school kid who got powers from. Basically, if you took Peter Parker and combined him with a Green Lantern Corps, that's what Richard Rider was. He was a high school kid who got his powers from a outer space police officer, for lack of a better term. That's what the Nova Corps was. They were a Green Lantern Corps, but the Marvel version. And so Nova here, Richard Rider, he got his powers, and he had his own book that ran for, I don't know how many issues it ran, and it was, typical high school kid with powers, and he is now powerless to start this book off, and Night Thrasher is recruiting him, so to speak, and he gives him his powers back. Then we see our third character here. This is Marvel Boy, and he is heading to Avengers Mansion to try out. He wants to try out and join the Avengers. Their automated security systems kick in, and then next thing you know, he's all folded up. So Cap comes out and tells him, he goes, I take it you're Vance Astro? He says, I am Vance Astrovic. So now what that is in reference to is there is a book. There's a group of characters out there. They're called Guardians of the Galaxy. Now this is the Guardians of the Galaxy team and team members that is different than what you have seen in the Marvel movies. And Vance Astro is on that team. And he was a astronaut. And they decided to send him into deep, deep, deep space. But the journey was so long that they basically had to put him in some sort of suspended animation, or not suspended animation. They had to put him in some sort of suit that he would never be able to step out of. So they stick him in this suit, send him into outer space on a journey that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so he lands in the far off future, meets other heroes, and they establish the Guardians of the Galaxy. And during that time period, the Guardians of the Galaxy, they traveled back in time, and they had an adventure with Captain America and the Avengers. And that is how Captain America knows Vance Astro. But however, this kid here does not grow up to be that version of Vance Astro due to continuity and space-time type stuff. But however, because there was like a thing where they ran into each other, that triggered his mutant powers of telekinesis. So that's kind of confusing, but that is why he says right here that he knows Vance Astro, and he goes by Vance Astrovic. But anyway, long story short, this character, Marvel Boy, he wants to be a superhero really bad. He wants to use his powers to help people. He sees Captain America and the Avengers as like the gold standard of superheroes, and that is his goal, is to be an Avenger. You know, Cap tells him, look, you need to get some reps, you need to get some training, you need to get some maturity, and then come back later and maybe you can be an Avenger. And here he's kind of complaining. He says, you know, how am I supposed to get these reps? How am I supposed to become an experienced superhero if I can't get on a team? And then he runs into Night Thrasher and Nova, and Night Thrasher recruits him. And this is an advertisement for the Uncanny X-Men video game for Nintendo. This thing was trash. This video game was not very good at all. It was a just train wreck. I'm sure you could find it on YouTube, and you know, if you were someone that liked the X-Men and you're like, oh wow, check it out, a Nintendo game featuring X-Men, you were sorely disappointed. So now we meet the fourth member of our team. This is Namorita. She is Namor the Submariner's cousin, and she is basically like a college student right here. She is attending class at the college in New York City, and they are at a site where the Fantastic Four beat up one of Galactus's heralds, and this is the site of the battle. And so she is here with the rest of the class. They are observing any sort of environmental damage that might have been done. So like I said, this was the 90s. We were very big about the environment, protecting the environment, stopping environmental destruction. So they are there. Now we get to Night Thrasher's lair. So this is his lair here. This, I don't remember what this guy's name is, but the lady here, her name is Ty, and this guy is basically like Night Thrasher's weapons guy. He knows a lot about computers and weapons. He was like a mercenary or something at one point. Ty is kind of like the martial arts specialist, you know, kind of like a Wong from Doctor Strange, you know. So basically, Night Thrasher shows Nova and Marvel Boy his lair. They have all these hyper fast computers, very powerful computers or whatever. And now here he is recruiting. He has hacked a computer system, and he finds their next recruit, and that is Firestar, who you might know from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Now also, we find out here what Night Thrasher's goal is, you know, while they're talking and everything. We'll come back to that here in a minute. I thought they talked about it here, but it must be at a later scene. So Night Thrasher gets Firestar's phone number, calls her up, says, we know who you are, come meet us at blah 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 blah. So she's very outraged. Angelica's a very private person. She doesn't want people knowing that she's a mutant. Then we cut to our next scene. Now this kid here, this is Speedball, Robbie Baldwin, and he was one of my favorite characters as a kid. I really liked him. Just a really cool and crazy power. We get to see him later. So we cut back to the scene where Namorita is, the battle scene where the FF destroyed Terrax, and they're doing this experiment on the soil, and things start to go kind of screwy. Terrax explodes out of the machine. He's reformed himself. He says that he's alive. He has returned. Namorita jumps into battle. Then we get back to everybody is hanging out. They're just talking. Night Thrasher, he tells Nova he wants to wage a war on crime. Firestar shows up, unleashes a blast. She's pissed off that these people are trying to blackmail her. Night Thrasher says that he wants her to join the team. And Angelica, Firestar, she says, you didn't really have to blackmail me. You know, you could have just asked, for God's sakes. Now there's been alarm. You know, the fight's going on. They're alerted to it. So they all have to, this is their first mission. They're heading out on together. Now, as you have been able to tell, Night Thrasher here, he is very much, what's the word I'm looking for here? He's kind of devious. You know, he's a good guy. He wants to, his origin is essentially Bruce Wayne. His parents were murdered in front of him. And he has, he got all their money and their building and their technology and everything. And he's devoted himself to fighting crime. And he's very ruthless, as you can see, the way he manipulated Firestar, the way he used Nova to, scare the shit out of him to get his powers to activate. Namorita's trying to fight Terrax here. He forms his axe. Meanwhile, we see Robbie Baldwin here. He is Speedball. He sees the battle, and he wants to get in on some of the action. He is with his mom in the city buying a TV. Now, Robbie Baldwin, Speedball, he is a character that was created in part by Steve Ditko. And Speedball that is, he first appears, and he has this in a Spider-Man annual. Then he gets his own book for maybe like 10 issues or something like that. It doesn't last terribly long. And his powers are any sort of physical jolt triggers his powers, and he basically cannot, he was exposed to like this really weird like science experiment went wrong and exposed him to this energy from another dimension or something like that. And now any sort of huge physical jolt turns him into Speedball, and he can bounce. Physical attacks don't hurt him. You can throw him off a huge building. You can drop him in front of a train. You can shoot bullets at him. Everything bounces off of him. He bounces off everything. So that's basically his power. He's very much a very lighthearted, fun guy. Doesn't take a lot of things serious. He's basically the jokester of the team. So you have the team now. They're trying to fight him. So one of the things about this book is all these characters incredibly young in age, but they had various levels of experience inside the Marvel Universe. You had Nova here. He wasn't a new guy to superheroics. Firestar, she had a handful of adventures with the X-Men and been involved with the Hellfire Club and the Hellions. Namorita, she was Namor's cousin, so she has ties to superheroics. So although they were young, some of them had some experience. Other ones were pretty green, but chronologically, their age, they were all very young. I don't think any of them, I think maybe the oldest was 20 or 21, something like that. They were very young, as opposed to the rest of the heroes like the Avengers, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. So these guys here were younger, and that's why their stories, and they felt like their place in the Marvel Universe was amongst hot button topics amongst in the 90s, the Gen X, us, our age demographic, our group. So that they basically try to put themselves together as a team and find their way. And Night Thrasher, as you see, he has a skateboard. He's got, like I said, Batman style gimmicks. He's got smoke bombs here. He has different sorts of weapons on his outfit right there. Meanwhile, back to the story, the guy tells Night Thrasher, I've got an idea on how we can beat him. Night Thrasher says, hey, talk to me about it. Namorita grabs him, flies up in the air. He starts screaming. Nova punches him back down. Speedball finally shows up on the scene. And as you see, he's bouncing all around. Mark Bagley draws a really great speedball. Very dynamic. Just a bunch of bouncing all over the place. He's getting shots on him. Marvel Boy notices that the little bubbles that Speedball puts off are causing like chip damage to Teryx. So he basically puts Speedball in this containment field, and he's bouncing all around there, bouncing, and all the bubbles are just building, and then he opens it up and shoots all of it at Terrax. So just a really huge shot right here, just tons of bubbles, just flying right at Terrax. Thousands and thousands of bubbles, chip damage galore. Basically rips all his skin off or whatever. Night Thrasher says he keeps using the ground soil to replenish himself. You guys fly him up in the air. So Nova and Namorita shoot straight up in the air. Terrax ends up exploding. Then just like little chunks of him come running back down to Earth. Nova's pissed off. He says, Thrasher, you let us kill him. Because Nova has experience being a hero, and he's very much against heroes killing. He's that classic style of hero as opposed to Night Thrasher, who is very much a 90s style hero. And then the scientist goes, yeah, well, Teryx has been dead for a long time. That was essentially just energy that was inside that had reanimated a bunch of soil. So it wasn't really the real Terrax or whatever. The Avengers show up on the scene and basically say, hey kids, good work. And so Avengers show up, they show up, tell the kid or the New Warriors good work. Then they hit the bricks. Nova, Namorita, they all kind of take it as offense to how Cap kind of talks down to them. Vance Astro says, well, hey, that's just Cap. He didn't mean anything to it. Vance Astro has a lot of hero worship that, like Nova, Namorita, Night Thrasher don't have. Like I said, he is very much the type of character who he puts characters like Cap. He puts Cap on a pedestal, the classic heroes on a pedestal. He wants to be them. He wants to emulate them. He wants to have that type of legacy. But he realizes he has to start somewhere. So they decide right here, Night Thrasher says, we can do this on our own. We can be a team. We can fight the kind of crime that they never touch. We can make a difference. We can help people. They all make a pact here. And they say, Speedball says, hey, I heard a reporter call us something kind of cool, the New Warriors. Night Thrasher says, that's it. That's the end of the discussion. But you've got 6 characters here. Speedball, he's the Comic Relief. Firestar, she's the mutant that can fly and shoot, energy projectiles. She, her power is very dangerous. She's very self-conscious about using it. And since she's a mutant, she's, kind of apprehensive about that as well. Now that I think about it, you got 3 mutants on this team. Firestar, Namorita, and Marvel Boy. So you've got Firestar here. She's really into being a hero, but not as much as like Nova and Speedball and Marvel Boy are. Firestar is a type of character that's been through a whole lot. So she kind of just wants to live in solitude. Namorita, she's very gung-ho, strong-willed. Nova, he's the same way. He's kind of like the loud, obnoxious guy, kind of a pig sometimes. He's the muscle of the group. And you've got Astro Boy. He's really super excited about being a superhero. Then you got Night Thrasher, who's a loose cannon. And also he has a ton of secrets that he has not let any of the other team members own at this point. So this is the formation of the New Warriors, and they do have an omnibus out. And that omnibus, I think it collects like the first 30 issues or something like that. So track it down. It's got great early Mark Bagley art in there. Really strong Fabian Nicieza story. like I said, this was my favorite book. I was definitely in the wheelhouse for this when it came out. I loved it. I love this book so much. I put a run of it together. It ran for, I think, about 75 or 70 something issues altogether. This first volume. It's had a handful of relaunches since then, to varying degrees of success. Fabian has not been on any of the relaunches. I think he has only revisited this book maybe through a one shot or two, or some short stories or something like that. So, I don't know how he feels about him. If he, if he would have any interest in bringing it back or whatever. Mark Bagley, obviously everyone knows what he went on to do. Amazing Spider-Man for a long amount of time, then Ultimate Spider-Man. So, but New Warriors, Heroes for the 90s, is one of my favorite things coming up. And a lot of people now, they don't know the New Warriors from this era. They just know the New Warriors that took part in the reality TV show that led towards the incident that kickstarted off the Civil War storyline, which is a shame, because that version of the New Warriors, I felt that version of the New Warriors that, was a part of the Civil War storyline, I felt like that was a joke. I felt like that was very disrespectful to this version of the New Warriors legacy. They painted them as clowns, incompetent glory hounds, very shallow, which was not how any of these characters were. These characters were very much committed to their mission as being heroes, to helping people, to, stopping, the problems of the day, environmental disasters, technology running rampant. They weren't like I said, the celebrity glory hounds that were shown in the Civil War storyline. And that's the thing that really kind of pissed me off the most about it. And of course, everything that happened to Speedball after that was just terrible. To me, this is who Speedball always will be. He will never be Penance, the guy who was responsible for the incident and who locked himself up in a suit of leather that had needles inside of it to remind him of all the pain that he caused. It's just so insanely dark. How can a character like this be Penance? That's just such a slap in the face to the character. I think today's youth would call that character assassination. But anyway, New Warriors, the early stuff is, you can probably find most of it in back issue bins. I think the first issue probably goes for like maybe $10 or something like that. This is just a raggedy reprint. The first issue probably goes for $10. All the ones after that, cheaper, maybe $5 or whatever it is. There is not I think maybe there's a couple of trades, because I think there's like 3 or 4 trades for New Warriors that collects the whole series. But what their availability is, if they're still in print or out of print, I'm not sure. I would probably gamble that they are not in print any longer. But the omnibus would probably be the way to go to get a good chunk of it if you didn't feel like putting it together individually issues. Because towards the end of the run, the issues do get hard to come by. But honestly, I would say you could probably do the first 25 to 30 issues and you would be fine. You would get the Fabian Nicieza Mark, because Mark Bagley definitely leaves after 25. So you would get basically the nuts and bolts of the book, without having to put together all those back issue stuff. But New Warriors, Heroes from the 90s, this is an underrated gem, and I highly recommend picking up some issues if you ever get a chance to. So till next time, you guys take care of yourself. I'll talk to you later. Have a good night, and bye-bye.